gym and health. You might have 3A lunch, which would be 10:16 to 10:48, and then they would have social studies for the remainder of block 3. So if you notice, block 3 is 2 hours long with the lunchtime built in there. And then they might have an elective block 4. The next day, they would have an elective first block, math block 2, English, and then lunch and world language. So that's a sample student schedule.
So since you have 80 minutes of class, do you think that last 10 or 15 minutes of the class would be that effective in terms of learning because it's end of the...
Sure. So when I was a principal, I dealt with that in my school. So it would require staff members to be able to readjust the way they deliver that instruction, right? Get kids up and moving more, right? And again, we talked to the staff members, and we were really looking for department chairs and supervisors to be able to work with the staff members to be able to hone those skills to be able to deliver it a little bit differently. We also talked about offering some time over the summer for staff members and departments to get together and say, how are we going to do this? Really to give them that support. So yeah, it is an adjustment. There's no question about it.
In the sample, it says the NJDO parameters were 80 minutes, 5 days a week for 90 days.
Sure.
But I only see 4 classes.
Sure, that would be 180 days. So if you're looking at a day, if you were looking at a day, right? So that's every A day would be every other day. So that's 90 days.
Okay. Into the 180 days.
Right. And then B days would be the other 90 days that they would have.
And also, in the group, the formulation of the team for discussion.
Sure.
Were students allowed in there?
We talk to students not in that group, but we talk to them afterward, and I'll talk about their questions and concerns
Okay.
coming up.
So is there division of classes in terms of A days and B days? Like, so for example, like if you have a science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there the selection that only certain class that you can take it?
On certain days.
Right.
So we have the capability in Genesis to be able to dictate that, right? Honors chemistry is only offered on an A day, right? We only have however many sections are only offered on A days. Is your concern that a kid might have science, math, and English on the same day?
Yeah, so it's kind of
Right.
like you want to have the day, right, where
Yep.
it's just
It's
not
balanced. Correct.
like,
Right, so I don't have all of my hard academic classes on one day. Yeah, so what we would do is, so let me explain the process of building a schedule. So we have all the course selections that the kids make. So we know how many numbers of chemistry kids, how many number of English 9, how many number of AP Bio. So we divide that number up by however number we want in the class, and then we put those numbers of sections in the computer. We assign teachers to those sections. So we do all of that back work, we press a button, and for 4 hours, 5 hours, the computer puts the kids all in these classes, right? And what you're hoping for is that about 90% of these kids have 100% scheduled in their classes. Doesn't always work, but that's what you're hoping for. Then the real work begins from the counselors, right? And Teresa Edmondson. They go into each kid's schedule, make sure of things like that. So if a kid is, by Genesis, scheduled for all of his difficult or her difficult classes on one day, they move those things. And then they hand schedule the kids who don't have a full schedule. So yeah, that's definitely possible. But it's also possible for us to say, okay, well, we're only going to allow certain classes to be on B days. An expository writing, right? Which has a lot, typically a lot of writing in it, something like that. And I know schedules are really confusing, I understand, so I'm here.
I'm sure the committee has given this a lot of thought, so this is kind of more of a comment than a question. But currently under the 7D2 schedule, you would have a class, say, 10 times over the span of 14 days. And on an AB schedule, you'll have them 7 times over the course of 14 days, but the same instructional time, just the length of the classes are different. However, that's because the same content has to be delivered over the course of the school year. It's not as though you can go more in depth in a given topic because you happen to have more time in the block. You still have to have, you have to have your scope and sequence now adjusted for the new reality of fewer classes. I just want to be sure that the board, and the district understands that this is an enormous ask of our high school teachers. And that it'll be very important that we provide the resources for them to get this done. And by that I mean, there's nothing harder than being a first-year teacher, right? You go, you go in, you're doing your lesson plans each day, you're finding out what works. Some things work, some things don't. Year 2, you're looking back on that, you're making your adjustments, where they worked, where they didn't. By year 3 or 4, you've pretty much got your playbook down. And you're making, adjustments now as you go. But this, if you've been, doing this now 7, 8, 9 years, and you've got your plans, you know what works, everything's there, you're kind of going back to the beginning, and you've got to craft an entire new set of plans for the whole year to make this happen. So just, I think it would really be incumbent on the board, if we were to make the move to this schedule, just to recognize that we have to provide the teachers with the resources and the time, and the compensation to get this done.
Any other questions? And we've thought about all that, yes. And reactions from the teachers, we've answered, and I actually addressed a couple of those questions here as well. So, but yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so a sample teacher schedule. Homeroom first, English 9, then they would have an 80-minute prep, a lunch, then English, honors English 9, then English 9. Then on the B day, they would have different, they might have prep first block, right? And then they would have honors English 9. So overall, they have teach 3 blocks in a day, but 6 over the 2-day period.
So to Bill's point, is there any other high schools that have this type of?
Absolutely.
Okay, and when you solicited feedback, did you talk to any of those other high schools?
Absolutely. Yeah, and
Okay.
they love it.
What other high schools have it?
So South Brunswick has it.
Okay.
I think West Windsor has it. My kids' district has a block schedule that's A and B. I have a ton of other schedules where I talk to principals that, so there's a give and a take, right? There's a
Yeah.
balance for everything. And you'll see when we talk about a couple more slides that the balance that comes with this supports a lot of the needs that we do have.
I have a question.
Sure.
Schools that you spoke with, or that they have the same similar, are their start times the same?
Yeah, they start early.
Just to-
Yeah,
Because
it's early.
attention span is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it's early, so a school start time is a different conversation.
I understand
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
it has a lot to do with attention span, 80 minutes for a child that
Yeah,
gets fell asleep.
they start just as early, unfortunately.
We want our football rivals to have really early start.
Yeah.
South
How would
Brunswick.
this impact the homework time?
How would it impact the homework time? So you're asking for an additional class, right? And we'll talk about what type of additional class. You're also asking for additional, like, an A-B day, right? But you also don't have the same amount of classes, so you have work for 4 classes. And maybe one of them is an elective, is not homework related, right? Homework in 80 minutes will have to be a discussion with the teacher, right? About the student wellness and things like that, which we talked about in our committee as well. Student and staff stress is on a couple of next slides. Yeah.
We're keeping the 120 credits still?
So we have way more than 120 credits already. This will actually give you 140 credits. I'm sorry, 160 credits to graduate.
Oh,
But that won't be the requirement. We'll talk about that as
okay.
well. Yeah, the state requirement's 120. I think we have like 135 there. All right, so again, going back to what this all means, students will have 4 blocks in a day that won't rotate. 8 classes over the 2 periods, over the 2 days, A, B, and the staff will teach 3 blocks in a day. Right, so what does this look like in the end? So this slide is almost repetitive to the slide that we talked about before, because when we developed that other slide, it was in the beginning stages about what the problems were that we were trying to address. Right, allowing students to have more electives over their high school years, strengthening participation in elective courses, creating more offerings, check, upper level academic courses and career readiness, check, college articulations, right, equity and schedule for teaching staff, consistent daily prep for teaching staff, and we'll talk about that in a second, less movement in the halls, right, a staff teaching day, 3 teaching periods in a day, no assigned duties to any teaching staff member. which is, again, a huge benefit to their ability to plan for a class every day. 80-minute prep every day, a 40-minute lunch period every day for students and staff, increased passing time for all. So some teachers go from classroom to classroom. They don't have their own room. So for them, passing time is important as well, right? Or just a chance to go to the restroom, right? The extra couple minutes would be advantageous, right? No midday homeroom period that most of the high school staff, from what I'm told, I'm not one of them, have to manage rather than use productively, right? Other points of interest, right? Coverage for all uncovered classes will be paid, right, at their hourly rate. So right now, when staff members are asked to cover a class, they don't get paid. Really does not value, and they have to give up their prep time. They don't get paid for that, for going and having student contact time, having to manage behavior, things like that. That'll speak volumes to the value that we put on them. Right? Study halls will change to academic classes. What I mean by that is study halls now, students have study halls basically because some places we just don't have places to put them. But right now there's a good number of kids in them, and again, it's just simply a study hall where kids go and sit, right? Change to an understanding that it's academic, where there'll be smaller classes and there'll be an understanding that you need to help them with whatever you can help them with, right? As one of their 6 teaching periods. And there'll be a limited number of study halls. We, talking to Teresa Edmondson, she doesn't think she would need more than, 2 or 3 study halls a block, which is a lot less than what we have.
I thought in the what we're involved in now allows for like student mentoring. That's why we put those in there.
Yep.
Is that still something that?
Yeah, so there's a few groups that utilize that middle homeroom time.
Right.
But again, by and large, it's only about 20% of the population. This will allow an increased early release for senior students who meet the requirements and maybe want to go to work or other reasons why they want to leave. Again, I'll speak personally about, my son left 11 o'clock his senior year all year because he met his requirements, he went straight to work, and it was great. Graduated with honors, doing really well, right? So it'll increase the early release for seniors, and it will bolster up our co-op program because of the rotating basis, not a lot of kids are capable of giving up those afternoon blocks to leave to go to work, as far as co-op is concerned. Right? No middle lunch period. So if you noticed on the schedule, there's not 2 lunch periods in a row where the Sodexo staff and our lunch proctors, our safety people, our administrators, right, have some time in between before the next group of kids get to the lunch period. Right? And also means that no classes are interrupted. The school I used to work at, we had 3 lunch periods in that 3rd block class. So a kid would either have A lunch, where he would go to lunch and then class the rest of the block, C lunch, where he would have a full class and then lunch, or that B lunch, where it would be interrupted. So you'd have half a class of English, a bell would ring, you would go to lunch, and then you go back to the rest of English. So we wanted to avoid that. And one of the most important things for the board, one of the goals you approved recently was the ability to add a freshman transition program, which would include service learning, financial literacy, organizational skills, mentoring, things like that. So we would utilize one of the freshman courses, that new 8th period course, for every student to be able to have freshman seminar and really understand the transition to high school.
I'm so happy you mentioned it tonight. I was at the city dump. I actually had a student come here tonight. He met with the PTO president in the back, and that was one of his concerns. I asked him, I said, you know what, I want you to learn to voice for your own, become a voice. And I'm so glad, young lady, that you spoke up. So I saw you shaking heads when you were talking about minutes. So our biggest challenge is to get students to use their voice. And that was one of the concerns of what are we going to do for students about financial literacy, about credit, and all those things for those. And he actually came. He works at the city dump. Jeff, you mentioned he knows you, Mr. Marcel Dunn, but he couldn't stay because it was during the MLK presentation. So I am actually glad that this came up again, because I mentioned about
Sure.
the co-op and financial literacy, so
Yeah.
these are things students were concerned with, especially those who weren't preparing to go to college,
Right.
who were gonna go straight into the workforce, as this young man did.
So right now, it is a state requirement that we deliver financial literacy to students, but it's done all different ways. Some students take it online, some students take it a different year. So a consistent program, we think would be a better way to deliver that. But again, the freshman transition program is close to my heart and one of the goals that we were trying to meet. So I think this will be a nice opportunity to be able to do that. Frequently asked questions and concerns from students. Another class, more stress, right? More homework, right? More things like that. We look at this as an opportunity for a couple of things, right? We want the students to be able to take electives they might not be able to take in 7 courses a year. So we want them to take a course maybe with less stress, but to open up more avenues of release, of passion, of whatever it may be. Basically go back to the electives that we're talking about. I'm not looking at this as, okay, well, when I'm taking another AP class. I know some parents are going to say, well, it's a great opportunity, let's take another AP class. That's not the point, but we get it. We also have students who might have, excuse me, opportunities where they're taking 3 or 4 AP classes. Well, a study hall or early release might be great for them because it gives them time to be able to just decompress and sit and do some work before they have to go to work or go play sports or go to band, things like that. Second lunch is late and grade level lunch. Yeah, the second lunch is late. I mean, again, we got to give something to get something. The second lunch is definitely late. Right now, I think the latest they eat 11 o'clock to 11:30. This would be like 12:15 or 12, something like that. It would be late. But we would manage, try to manage breakfast, and with the amount of time in between classes, kids like other schools would snack or whatever it may be. Yeah, Doc.
In the past couple of years, we've invested a lot of money into safety officers, and then we did the double door
Sure.
vestibules. Those safety officers sit and, let people in, et cetera. Does this scheduling affect,
It does not.
it does not?
No, so the safety officers would be assigned to the doors. The security officers, we feel we could use, and Mr. Lester as well, more effectively in a zone area. So we're not, it won't affect the doors and what we intended for the safety officers.
Okay.
So I put grade level lunch up there because it was a concern of some kids. Since 6th grade, they've been eating, actually before that, they've been eating with their entire grade. Right? Am I right? So some kids are like, well, I don't want to eat with, different kids or another, 11th graders rather than 12th graders. Again, I go back to there's got to be some give to be able to get what we're trying to achieve. Right? And yeah, that's actually true. But I also like the interaction between different grades. I think it's positive, especially if they're upper grades, 11th to 12th and 9th to 10th. So. Another question was longer period structure. Again, an adjustment. But some very high-level schools in the state have 80-minute periods and block schedule. All right, so adjustment. Just as 7 years ago when we went to the 7D2, we actually ran, I don't know who knows, but 3 different schedules at the high school. There was a schedule for freshmen where they had 80 minutes?
Yes,
At least the freshman structure was the 80 minutes, right? Yeah.
It was in a block format.
Block format, they had 80 minutes for math and language arts, and then they had not 80 minutes for the rest of the class, so it was a block format. 10th graders had a different schedule, and 11th and 12th graders had a different schedule, all in the same school, right? So when we went from that to 72, that was an adjustment as well. So
Sophomores were 96 minutes.
sophomores were 96 minutes, that's rough. Talk about attention span. Longer passing time, longer lunch, they thought that was positive, right? A 27-minute lunch up to a 40-minute lunch now, and longer passing times in between classes. Option 2, that would still be in place and be easier for us to do. Option 2 means if you would like to bypass an elective course that you're mandated to take by the state, to take an upper level science or math class, you could do that if in fact you meet those requirements outside of school. So if you wanted to option to a course gym, if you play a varsity sport, and we have those rules in place already, if you play a varsity sport, you'll get credit for your gym. If you play the piano, take piano lessons, you'll get credit for your fine arts. So again, it'll allow you to take different courses. And again, we talked about the early release and what that would look like. Yeah.
Unless I'm reading it wrong, the lunch is going to 32 minutes or 40?
It should be 40, right?
You included passing time.
I included passing time, so yeah, 32 minutes plus the passing.
Okay, 32 minutes of actual.
Yeah,
of
actual,
food
yeah.
time. And then, another question is, could one of the advantages of this schedule be greater flexibility in offering, say, 2.5 credit
Absolutely.
elective courses?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would actually have a 2.5 credit course for half of the year on a B day, then another one on another B day. Yeah, which would be, financial literacy or whatever. it may be.
That was the one that leapt to mind.
Yep.
It's very, very important to teach, but
Yep.
it doesn't necessarily have to be a
Financial
5 credit
literacy,
course.
CPR,
You can get through that. in
yoga,
2.5.
things that we could get through quicker, driver's ed, things like that. And we have it built in now, but it could be more specific to a time frame. Absolutely. Frequently asked questions and concerns from teachers. What are staffing implications? So anytime you change the schedule, rightly so, the staff is going to be like, well, what does this mean? Are we going to have less teachers? Well, the answer is no. Last year when we built the schedule, I asked Teresa Edmondson to run a mock schedule of what this would look like with all the teacher requests if we had 8 periods, with all the student requests, I'm sorry, if we had 8 periods. And I wouldn't be standing here if we needed 10 more teachers, right? And I wouldn't be standing here if we needed 10 less teachers. Our whole mantra here is to take care of people, and this is part of that. So no, we would not. Right? How many different courses would a staff member teach? Well, we would like to keep them to 2 preps, so 2 different types of classes, and that would be the goal. Right? An additional class would add another full class number to the staff teaching load. Example, 5 classes if they have that now, would they have 125 students, right? If you give me a 6th class, you're going to give me 25 more kids. Well, we wouldn't have enough kids in the school to be able to do that, right? So that's not going to happen, right? Our goal is to, keep them at a decent number like they have now, and some classes are higher than others. But they might have a class of 28, but the next one they have might be 16, right? The overall teaching load would go down because we'd be spreading the kids over more periods in the day. All right. Limit number of students in certain areas, absolutely. So we have the capability in Genesis to be able to say, well, expository writing can only get 16 kids a class because there's so much grading for those papers. Engineering can only have 16, or robotics can only have 16 kids in a class because we only have 16 computers in the class. TV and video could only have 20 because we only have 20 computers, right? So the point would be, I think the next bullet's right, what would the half-day schedule look like, and then general questions. So once we determine that this is, the direction that we need to go, the department chairs and supervisors would be sitting with Teresa Edmondson and saying, well, what are the needs of your departments, specifically about classes that, might need lower class numbers, AP classes, do they need to be backed up to a gym so they can have extra time for labs, things like that. There's a lot of things that are very confusing in the schedule, but if you understand it going in, there are a lot of things you could do proactively to take care of issues. What would a half-day schedule look like? We'll work that out. We'll figure it out, right? General questions, a snow day, if a B day is snowed out, right? If we don't have school on a B day, what would the next day be? Well, B day, right? We wouldn't have 2 A days in a row, right? And then, some department needs, et cetera. So this might be small, but you also have it in front of you. These are the committee members that were with us the entire time. And I'm going to ask my 2 PTEA people to come on up and offer any comments that they might have.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for coming, Tim. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Tim Simonitis, President, PTA. Excuse the voice, I got a little cold. First, I want to take the time to thank you, Dr. Ornelli, for the open and honest conversation and dialogue we've had throughout this whole process. We've discussed both the pros and cons, both for students and for staff. We feel that at this point, though, we are ready to move forward. There are still some concerns remaining, but they are easily addressed as far as scope and sequence, like Mr. Irwin brought up, planning time, etc. And Dr. Ornelli we did speak about using PD days going forward, as well as summertime going forward to adjust schedules. I know when I was teaching in the middle school, I started out in a 40-minute block, and then we jumped right to 90 minutes every other day. and then we back down now to 60 minutes. So there is time for adjustment. It's not going to be, you're not going to hit the ground, you're going to have to hit the ground running, but you're not going to have your stride right away. One of the ways to do it is to kind of adjust, for your 80 minutes. Some teachers who are comfortable in a 40-minute period could do a 40-minute block, a 40-minute, cut the block into 40 and 40. And plan, different activities that'll be a 20, a 20, a 20, et cetera. So you're not sitting in your seat for 80 minutes just hearing a lecture or, reading and writing. There are ways around it to adjust. And thank you again, Mr. Irwin, for bringing up the need for staff to have the time and have the support. And I know over the years, you guys have always supported the staff, so I don't anticipate that changing. And I do know that if this move is made, you will continue and provide that for our staff as well as our students. Anybody have any questions for me?
Tracy, you good?
But no, we've gone around in circles on this for a little bit, and I think we're in a good place to move forward on it.
Well, the question is, what do you think in terms of implementation and a decision from the board? You've got half a year left. There's, functions like the Piscataway High School Experience. There's for the parents of the 8th graders.
We've got
in
much
middle
more than
school.
half a year
So
left,
what do you
Dr.
think in
Connors?
terms of a rollout?
Sure,
What do you think of?
So the next steps is in checking in the past, I didn't come across any approval from the board necessary to change that schedule, so it would be a discussion and, kind of like, you have our blessing. The next step would be the parents and students.
Okay.
I wouldn't wait for the experience to do that. We would have night meetings and offer parents who are interested to come in and hear about all this and what the implications are. Parents are going to have mixed feelings, and there will be an adjustment period, but overall, the benefits to students and staff, we think, outweigh, the things like a later lunch period or not having lunch with all the same grade, academically, and for the well-roundedness of students, we think it's very beneficial. I mean, when I got here and knew that they were only given 7 courses to the students, my mind went immediately to, well, we're at a disadvantage, right? And how could we adjust that, right?
Dr. Rinelli, if this is approved, when would it be implemented?
September, right? So we are doing this now. I think Teresa Edmondson would need this time in November to be able to start to build the bones of that schedule. Because again, she's building the parameters in the background, and I understand it because I did it, right? She's building the parameters in the background, then putting the courses in that the kids are going to want to take, things like that. But there is an adjustment for her to be able to do that. But the rollout would be just like the rollout with the PTEA. We would invite all the parents in, go down to the 8th grades and do the same thing, make sure they understand what the new schedule looks like and the benefits and advantages, and we'd move forward.
The course selection, I believe, is in January.
Yep,
so
it
that
sure is.
It would need to be set up.
Yep. So between now and before the holidays, the winter break, we would meet with whoever wanted to meet at the high school and the middle schools regarding parents and students and the like.
Any other further questions for?
In the back.
Question for Dr.
Sure.
Two clarifying things. Can you explain to me how this is going to not have assigned duty to the teaching staff?
Sure, so,
And the
I'm sorry.
second one, sorry.
That's okay.
The second one is, how does the coverage for uncovered classes will be paid? Like, just explain those.
Sure, so they sort of it's the same answer, right? Currently, we pay a certain amount of money to ask teachers to teach that 6th class, right? Certain teachers we asked to teach 6 classes, and they get paid to do so. Others don't get paid to do so, right? So that money would be more than enough to have 3 more daily subs to be able to take care of the duties, and to also be able to work in paying their daily rate for, their hourly rate for covering classes.
So you're shifting the resources.
Shifting the resources.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, questions in the back.
I really like this idea.
Fresh?
Compared to 7D2.
Thank you.
Only reservation is homework kind of.
Yeah, and again, we get it, and there is some adjustment. When they went to the 7D2, I'm sure there were adjustments there. And some staff members will look at this as an opportunity to say, oh, great, let's pile it all in, but we have to work with them. And we have the commitment from the PTEA that we'll all work together to try to give the students the best opportunity they can, and the staff. Yeah. John?
So, I'd like to thank you for taking this on. And
It's not easy, yeah.
As a member of the Parent-Teacher Association for the orchestra, it breaks my heart to hear 5 to 6 kids say they have to turn their uniform in because they can no longer be in the orchestra or band because of the schedule conflict.
So let me comment before you go on, right? So somebody talked about the academies. If someone is in the engineering academy, we tell them what their electives are going to be the next 4 years. So we tell them, unfortunately, you can't take arts. You have to take your fine art, because that's a requirement for the state, but you can't take any other ones. So the academy kids will be able to do other things that they want to do. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but.
No, that's fine. Question I did have was, there's some classes that are like AP classes, like AP Calc, that are, I guess, 10 credits
Yep.
right now, and classes that have labs associated.
Sure.
with it. Are they still going to have labs and?
So a class like that, the AP classes, the AP test is in March, and I'll tell you how my kids do it, right? And how I've had an experience as a principal. We would give that for 3 marking periods every day, so they would get their 10 credits and have it every day. And if there's a need, which we talked about the need for each department having a nuance that we'd have to address, if there's a need, we would back certain classes up to gym, because gym could give up, according to the parameters of the state, 1 day a week and not have to be delivered. So they need 4 days a week where everybody else needs 5. Yeah,
What would happen to clubs that are during the second lunch
so
period?
you'd have to find other times, either before school or after school.
But what if the clubs, like, so for example, I have a teacher who can't do the club after school, so she does it during homeroom.
Sure, there's gonna have to be adjustments where either the teacher can, or there's gonna be a different staff member. So, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's gonna be limitations.
And there's no way in the schedule to have homeroom in the middle again, it has to be.
Unfortunately not, and there's only 5 minutes for homeroom.
And you guys think it's like worth the fact that a lot of people are gonna be coming late thinking it's okay, like, you guys could say all you want, but a lot of people are gonna be like, you know.
Yeah, so that's why we'd have homeroom at the end of the block or the beginning of block 2. So the academic would start right at 7:15.
And like mental health wise, you guys consider that too?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's great questions, but yeah. Nice, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
And that concludes my report. Dr. Connors?
Okay. Anybody need a break?
The lights.
Let's take a 1 2-minute break.
Yep, that'd be great.
Yeah.